What is happening, you beautiful bastards? Welcome back to another week. This week, we talked to a gentleman named Bob Cohen. He talks about all things psychedelic and trippy.
That's true. He's actually a professor, not of not of science. He doesn't actually teach science. He teaches English, but he has spent a lot of time doing research and looking into very deeply the medicinal side of psychedelic drugs. And we have actually covered this before. It comes up surprisingly often, and I think you guys are going to really like this one. But there's some caution that we want to share with you guys ahead of time. So the context of this conversation,
yes,
is very geared toward the medicinal side, sometimes the spiritual side of psychedelic drug use, and that's macrodosing and microdosing. So if you're trying to look into this for like a party drug, this is not the episode. But there is another warning that we should share with you guys ahead of time. So if you decide to cut out early, you don't go doing crazy things. So microdosing things like LSD and psilocybin, right? They are very good for psychotherapy. And that's come to light in the last 15 years, and it's a growing science. However, as you'll hear later on in the show, we are not doctors. Bob Cohen is not a doctor. And a very important thing to consider is if you are on antidepressants, you have depression, and you think maybe microdosing is the answer for you, it's very possible. But you cannot mix them with antidepressants, especially SSRIs, because if you take any amount of psychedelic substance with an SSRI, it can cause something called Ssri Syndrome, which will kill you. Don't do that.
Was it Ssri Syndrome, or it was... No, I don't remember. It wasn't that.
Oh. So if you take it...
Hold on.
If you take it with SSRIs, it can have a chemical reaction. They don't mix. It could kill you.
Yes.
Don't fuck with it. So if you listen... Yes. If you listen to this episode, you like the things you hear, this is like step one for your research. This is not all the answers. This is your introduction. So take it that way, because if you just listen to what we say here and run with it, you might find yourself in some trouble.
On the show, we are dumb monkeys, and we might be entertaining and it might be fun to listen to, but if you need medical stuff, talk to a doctor, not us.
No. So that being said, we just wanted to get that disclaimer out of the way. Let's go talk to Bob.
What is happening, you beautiful bastards?
We were actually just discussing climate change and what Joe Manchin pulled today.
Oh, fuck. You know what? I don't care if anybody hears me say, oh, fuck about that one. You know.
Oh, don't worry about it. You can swear on here. You're good.
Yeah. Well, I'm a professor. I swear in class too. So I warned my students up ahead. I said I swear like a sailor. So just get over it.
I would be bad as a professor. So many people would be offended.
Well, yeah, it's you know, this isn't a bad thing, but we're getting a lot of training now on microaggressions and Title IX, and it's, you know, the terrain is very complicated.
Oh yeah. You're no matter what you do, you're treading so lightly, and to me, that's a good thing and a bad thing.
Yeah,
stuff that you just don't touch anymore.
Yeah, what I tell my students is, look, I do the best I can. Said I'm a baby boomer. There's stuff that, there's cultural programming here. If I do or say something that in some way offends you, let me know. I'll apologize, and we'll go from there.
Yeah,
that's all you can do if you don't know yet.
Yeah,
but the problem is, like, all it takes is that one thing, and all of a sudden you're done.
No, I know. Yeah.
And me, I'm not trying to offend anyone. It's just my mouth has no filter, and it just goes out. And I don't even know. We did an interview with a trans woman, a trans man.
Yep.
And I knew I was going to put my foot in my mouth. I just didn't know when. It took 15 minutes.
Okay, but you own that, right? You go, I tell my students, if I misgender you, I'm sorry. Tell me. Really, my frame is that in a good class, everybody learns from each other. So
absolutely,
there are things that you can teach me that I didn't know, and thank you.
Yeah, and he was a good sport about it. I was like, listen, I knew I was going to do it. I just didn't know when. And it's not out of me trying to be an asshole. You know, they know when you're trying to be a dick.
Right. Well, I'm from the Bronx, so everybody knows I'm an asshole, so I don't have to. I don't have to worry about that. And I like the Yankees too.
Oh, geez, no, that's fine. I'll let it happen now.
Okay.
Back in the late '90s, that was a different time.
Yeah, I said something to my students about that. I think yesterday I was like, "What was it? 2014 when the Yankees when the Sox beat the Yankees and kind of like really firmly changed the balance of the universe."
Yeah, probably. Might have been before then, but yeah.
Yeah, it was. Anyway, I was like, yeah, those days are over. I can't say Bucky, Denton, Bruckner anymore.
No, not at all. Like it used to be. It was like every year. It was like, oh, God. I mean, that's what non-Patriot fans must be like too.
Yeah.
Like, fuck. Of course, now we're down again.
Well, nobody's on top forever.
No, not at all. So, anyways, are you ready, Jared?
Ready. We've been talking for 5 minutes now.
All right. Anyway. The subject we wanted to get into, I thought it was microdosing, but you're telling me it's macrodosing?
Well, actually, I want to contextualize microdosing.
Sweet.
Good idea.
Also, I'm going to contextualize it in two ways. One it has to do with doing that versus macrodosing, because you have two choices there. And the other is to kind of put it in the context of the work that I do, which primarily relies on macrodosing to sort of to help me kind of like do the things I'm doing. So, what do you want to know?
So, well, I mean, let's go into some definition. What's the difference between the two?
All right. So the difference between microdosing and macrodosing is that when you take a macrodose, you're taking a psychoactive amount. So let's take LSD, for example. Psychoactive with LSD starts at 0.25 20 micrograms. With psilocybin, which is the other medicine that people are most familiar with, anything at about a gram dried and over is psychoactive. So when you microdose, what you're doing is you are taking a perceptual dose of the substance. And the idea behind microdosing versus macrodosing is that you're treating it more like a pharmaceutical when you microdose. And it's something that you do with some regularity, versus when you macrodose, the peak experiences are what it's all about. And that's not something you do regularly. Yeah. I mean, people, like I know people trip every weekend. Actually, you really can't trip all that much because of the tolerances, but I know people that will do macrodoses. And that's recreational. It's very different from psychospiritual, and kind of puts it in a whole different, really for a whole different category. One that I'm at this stage of the game, I'm not interested in. Like, it's no fun to get fucked up with your friends on Saturday night with that stuff. Like, I'll have a couple.
Oh yeah,
I'll do it with scotch.
But if you're a responsible adult, sometimes that's kind of difficult. You know what I mean? Like, I can't go and drop down an eighth of shrooms on a Saturday morning. Like, I'd be screwed. I got kids.
You can. The peak.
It makes for really interesting.
I got a good story about that, actually. But you're in and out in about 6 hours. See, that's the difference with psilocybin. If you look at the trip effect profile, it's got a very steep curve. So you take it, and within an hour ish, depending on how empty your stomach is, you're hitting. You're riding to peak. But the drop off is also pretty fast as well. So if you get a chance, look at a website called Arrowwood. So it's arrowwood.org, I think. It's
Arrowwood?
Arrowwood, EROWID.
Okay.
And they're like Wikipedia for drugs.
Okay.
Gotcha.
But the difference between, say, Arrowwood and actually it's probably true of Wikipedia as well these days, but mostly the information in Arrowwood is generally very rock solid in terms of not being given the real deal on stuff. So one of the things you'll see there are graphs on graphs on trip profiles, right? So psilocybin, and this is why this is among the reasons why in the research now they're working with psilocybin, because the half-life on it is really short, so you can kind of get in and out. Whereas like with acid, that's about a 12-hour commitment. I mean, that's like, from end to end, you do, so like a psychoactive dose is about 20 micrograms. 100 is the standard street dose. Yeah. For LSD, you do a tab, like the tab, you do a tab of acid. You just signed up for a 12-hour ride.
But like, so what research are they doing with it then? Because we've heard that they're doing like PTSD research. What was the other one we heard?
It's kind of replacing Adderall out West Coast, Silicon Valley. They're all microdosing out there.
Yeah. That's like that. This whole James Fodderman thing. So Fodderman was a '60s era LSD researcher, and like Leary and Groff. Like actually, Leary, Groff, like they were sort of like in the psychospiritual end of that spectrum, and Fodderman was like, yeah, let's do this stuff so we can become better capitalists, right? And that's kind of and it's kind of weird, because when you're macrodosing most of these substances, you're connecting with the numinous. You're connecting with the wonders of the universe. The veil between your conscious and subconscious minds disappears. The veil between you and the multiverse disappears, and like you're hanging out, having these experiences that are divine, right? And most often, although there's some research that talks that context really matters a lot in this, but most often, or at least let's say as the trope goes, most often when you do those macro doses and you have those numinous experiences. Transpersonal, that was the word I was looking for. When you have those transpersonal experiences, they tend to sort of like make you want to move away from being a douchebag capitalist, and like they make you want to connect with people and that sort of thing. Whereas in Silicon Valley, they're taking this because, as you said, as Andy said, like pointing it kind of like making it a performance drug, rather than rather than this way of cracking open. Cracking open your operating system and hacking it to become a better human being.
But so is anyone actually doing like hardcore research with it, or is it just people taking
there's oh my goodness, we're in, this is the third wave of the third wave of the psychedelic movement, and it's characterized very much by the research. The medical model is the big thing right now. What's driving public acceptance of psychedelics right now is that SSRIs and all the traditional psychopharm meds that we're getting from our psychiatrists, they're not really working.
No, right. Or the side effects are so bad we don't want it.
Yeah, like you end up with dead dick, you end up with dry mouth, all just stuff that you don't want to have, right? And so this kind of goes back to, do you guys know Rick Doblin?
I don't know.
All right, so Rick Doblin is the big MDMA guy. He's actually the guy. His organization is driving the MDMA/PTSD research, and he heads up an organization called MAPS.org. I'm fumbling for because I'm really bad at remembering all those stupid what all those initials mean. I'll get that for you.
MAPS. They were doing ecstasy with her not.
That's MDMA.
I was going to say MDMA for PTSD. I know they were doing it for something else too.
Right. So it's Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. So Rick and that group, in that lull between when the federal government put the kibosh on psychedelic research and when it resumed, maybe about 10 years ago, probably about 15 years ago, they consciously chose the medical model to bring these medicines back to the public, rather than the turn on, tune in, and drop out model that Timothy Leary and the hippies were pushing.
Yeah,
I mean, there's a lot of convincing evidence of how that when psychedelics broke out of the lab, particularly LSD, that it scared the shit out of it scared the shit out of all the grown-ups in the 60s. You know,
Yep.
you guys are a little young, probably a little young for this. I was young, but I remember it. Like, it was crazy then. You know, the riots in the street. The kids are all like taking over dorm buildings. If you have co-ed dorms, by the way, thank the hippies, thank the baby boomers, because before that they didn't have them, right? So things got really out of hand. So, you know, we had Nixon, the drug war, the whole, like, all that stuff. And so Rick was very involved, and I don't know him personally. Like, I've met him, so I'm talking about him like he's my buddy. He's not. just to be clear. Anyway, they made a very conscious decision to medicalize it. Yep. And to sort of like get away from the psychospiritual piece of it. And so they began to do that research with PTSD. So if you look at all PTSD treatments, I'm going to throw out the number, and, you know, somebody out there will, you know, give me the exact number and say I got it wrong, but something in the neighborhood of about 50% of the traditional PTSD therapies work.
Yeah, I would be surprised if it's even that high. And they've done some weird stuff with it.
No, yeah, like EDMR, like all this crazy stuff, right? So then you have 50% that are getting left behind, and then we can talk about the quality of what that other 50% is, and you know, it's, you know, I think you end up where not a whole lot of people are getting helped. And right. So along comes MDMA, and it's an extraordinary medicine for PTSD. And so, you know, they're like they just published the phase 3 trials over the summer. And again, don't hold me, please, everybody. Like, don't hold me.
Nothing on yours. No, it's all opinionated.
Right. Like, I'm throwing out numbers that I remember. Like, I don't have the authoritative information in front of me, but something in the neighborhood of about 90% were measurably helped.
Which is crazy.
Yeah. I mean, it's really crazy. And so we're done with the phase 3 trials, but the bitch about the phase 3 trials was that because of COVID, they had a very, very small phase 3 trial population.
Okay.
So I think as I understand it, they're going to repeat the phase 3s again.
Yeah.
Because I think the number ended up being somewhere around 100.
Well, actually, last year, Andy and I were talking about this on another episode, and we saw an article about this, which is where we came across it. Was this random article we found on the internet. And from my recollection, the numbers were in the high 90s, close to 100% improvement as well for all the patients across the board for all the testing, which is a significant number.
And the crazy thing with PTSD is the people who are suffering of it are so willing to do anything and everything to be cured of it. So they're like, oh, ecstasy, sure, let's do it. I don't care. They've done barometric chambers. What's the one they do when a woman's pregnant? I can't think of it. What's the shot in the back?
Oh, epidural?
Oh, epidurals?
Yes, they've done that. Like, they've done everything.
Right.
Yeah. No, and like there's you know, people have, like, with the dreams, they give them blood pressure medicine, and the big difference between the psychedelic / MDMA ways of getting at PTSD are that they open you up and they help you uncover they help you address the trauma. Mm-hmm. Most of the psychopharm stuff, it's all about masking the symptoms.
Yeah.
Right. So, you know, you take, like, and it's funny, like SSRIs the SSRIs and psychedelics work on the same set of neuroreceptors, 5-HT2A. And the SSRIs are antagonists and the psychedelics are agonists. So agonists actually increase your production of serotonin and move it up into the brain. So it's sort of like, just like in the very nature of the two different medicines, you know, one's cutting off and the other's like opening up, right?
That's interesting.
Yeah. But then what ends up happening is with the tripping is that you have this is not stuff this isn't stuff I'm making up. It's all from my reading, right? So we have what we think of as our default mode neural network. So that's like your brain in consensus reality, just walking around, right? And you have, like you ruminate or you have like thoughts that happen all the time. That's what's going on in there. And part of that default mode neural network route means that you're routing your thoughts and your moods and whatnot through your prefrontal cortex. So that's the prefrontal cortex is the site of reasoning in your brain.
Okay.
And it's the place where we decide what's right and wrong, what's good and bad, what's comfortable, what's uncomfortable. So when you take any of these psychedelic medicines, MDMA being one, and ayahuasca, mushrooms, LSD, and all that, they actually inhibit the connections to your prefrontal cortex.
Really?
And they promote the connections in other parts of the brain. So that's why you get like things like people will see colors and that sort of thing.
So it's like a temporary remapping while you're tripping.
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Well, I've heard that before with shrooms, where it's almost like they find anyone who's done a good dosage of shrooms. It's almost like a remapping, but it's not remapping in like a bad way. Like they find anyone who's ever done it, when they come out the other side, is they just have a general better outlook. And I don't know the science behind it, but it just blows my mind. I've done shrooms. I have an excellent outlook in life, I think, but Jerry hasn't, and he has a pretty good outlook in life too.
Well, I mean, everyone's pathology and psychology are different, right? Like there's the way I like to think about this stuff is there are many roads to the same place.
Oh, right. Absolutely.
And I kind of like in my show Ouroboros Story Hour, I started out with like very hyper focused on psychedelics, and I've come to kind of really think I broadened it to consciousness hacking practices. And there are many, many, many ways that you can hack your consciousness: meditation, yoga, exercise, dry fasting. I'm in the middle of a 4-year commitment for doing Vision Quest. So it's you go up in the mountains. So like you dry fast for 4 days. The most extraordinary visions I've ever had were not on substances. When I was up on a volcano in Ecuador, away from everybody else, and not eating and drinking for 4 days.
I was gonna ask you what dry fasting is, but there you go. So how do you not? I mean, if you're not drinking for 4 days, I imagine you're probably not going through crazy amounts of exercise, because you're getting towards the limit there.
Yeah, it's funny when I first when I did my first year of Vision Quest, I made the mistake of Googling how long can a human being go without water.
Yeah, it's not long.
Did 4 days. What was the number? And I'm going like, wait, what? You're gonna, I'm supposed to. So here I am, spent all this money, got on a plane, flew to Quito, trusted somebody to take me out to Ibarra, which is like out in the boonies, up near Colombia, up on this volcano, where we're shitting in outhouses and sleeping in tents. And then they go, all right, now it's time for Vision Quest. And so we're going to take you up into the cloud forest where you can't see or hear anybody. And we're going to leave you there. And, and no food or water and nothing to dig a hole if you have to go to the bathroom. Sounds good.
Well, I'd imagine after a certain period of time, you don't have to go to the bathroom anymore. Yeah, you're not taking anything in.
Well, you would
still
think,
got
right?
what you had beforehand.
No, it's actually more
urinating a lot.
No, this is the crazy thing, right? So I go up, I do this. And I literally went up in tears because, the podcast people won't see this, but I'm not young. I just turned 64. So I started doing this like 2 years ago when I was 62.
It's never too late.
No, it's not. But I'm like, I went up in tears. I was like, I'm going to die. I know I'm going to die, but I've come all this way. I got to do it. Right.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And, like I live sort of like, I live, I think, in the exact middle between the spiritual and the scientific, and so I need which is a burden because I need both. Like I love hearing about energy and chakras and all that shit, but I got to know the science too, right? So
right. We're the same way, I think.
Yeah. So we go up there. We're in a cloud forest. That means that like where the Vision Questers go, you're in cloud for half the day.
Yeah.
So that's sort of like part of it. But what's really interesting is that if you think about it, you promise you don't talk, so you're not you lose a lot of moisture from your body when you talk. You lose moisture when you move around.
And you make an agreement not to speak to each other when you're up there.
No, you don't. There's nobody to talk to. You're in a little. You're like in a little pad. That little ledge, a little terrace that they cut out of the side of the mountain, and you go there and you sit there, and you get planted. You agree not to leave the area where they put you. You agree not to talk, to try not to sing to yourself, to yada yada, like all this stuff, right? So it's literally unplugging from everything, laying there.
Which a lot of people need nowadays,
right? And just being with yourself, and being with nature. So I was really worried about the pee thing. So I dug a little hole with the stick so that I could perk test the soil. So every time I urinated, I took note of how much the hole got filled up. The volume over the 4 days never changed.
Really?
Well, the thing people don't realize is you're holding, especially bigger people, you're holding a lot of moisture in your muscles, right? So your general body moisture that you have is usually will hold you 3 or 4 days. But especially if you're not eating, you end up pissing out all that moisture that's in your muscles.
Yep.
Like if you've ever done like what Jerry has to do on the regular, you'll urinate a lot right off the bat because you're getting all the water weight out of your muscles.
Are you talking about just fasting in general?
Fasting, it's also a lot to do with carbs. Carbs holds moisture in your muscles a lot.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned having to go up there and be by yourself and be specifically be with yourself. I know a lot of people who might have a real issue with that. How did that experience go for you?
I have to tell you that year one was one of the most extraordinary experiences I have ever had in my entire life. And I've drunk a river of ayahuasca and taken a lot of mushrooms. And I was an adventure journalist before I did what I'm doing now. I've jumped out of airplanes, gone scuba diving, climbed rock climbing. Like I've done lots of things.
Right.
It's extraordinary because you kind of like that experience requires you to form a more authentic relationship with yourself and with where you are in that moment.
Yeah, there's no bullshit yourself there.
Right. So you like, and so it was fun because even before I ever did psychedelics, even when I was ever since I was little, I could close my eyes and I see things. I see dead people. No, only kidding about that. But for meditation and other practices, like I've been able to visualize in ways that are very analogous to the visual experiences that I have with these medicines. So I kind of I spent my days just looking up at the clouds and imagining what they look like, like making shapes out of them. And then at night, I would look up at the canopy and make shapes make things out of the shapes that I saw above me. And so I kind of got into this kind of state. So by the third night, I was seeing the little spiritual beings that inhabit the volcano Imbabura. No drugs, no what we call medicine, but nothing like that. It was just there.
I had just whatever your body was doing to you.
On my last night, I had a vision of seeing this guy, and I saw his face, and I kind of saw him how he might, you might say that I saw him as he was on the other side,
right.
When I came down from the mountain that on the fourth day, this guy showed up in camp. No bullshit.
The same guy.
The guy. He's a Native American guy named Sleepy Eye, La Framboy. He's half Lakota and half Seneca, and he lives in Oklahoma now. I saw and he recognized me. We were like,
yeah, that's why that one's a little hard to explain, right?
I don't have an explanation for that except that this is where the bitch about science is that we only believe what we can measure, and what we can measure changes over time. So we can't measure that right now. So we don't, so we go, skeptics go bullshit, and the spiritual people say, I'm riding the waves of the energy, and they got my chakras going, and this and that and the other thing, right? I don't know. I do not have an answer for that. I had like a whole meeting with demons when I was up there, all without any substances.
Yeah, it's amazing what your body can do. Grizz, you remember me telling you about my experience meditating some years back, right?
Yeah, we were doing it when we were talking about lucid dreaming.
Yeah. So I actually, I never really gave it too much thought before, and I think it was like 2015 or so. For whatever reason, I was just like, yeah, I'm gonna try this meditation thing, see what happens, and I was really surprised because when I really got going, it took a couple of months to get to this point, but I started essentially hallucinating, having these visions. When I closed my eyes, I could see things that were like they were right in front of me. Like if I could reach out and touch them, they looked real enough that I'd be able to feel them. And I didn't really know where I was going with that. So I just kind of, it just tapered off and I stopped doing it. But ever since then, my position has gone from skeptical to like, all right, something is here. I don't have any idea what it is. So until, something comes along that can prove it, it's just something I think about from time to time,
Yeah, it's just, it's there. And so, as I said, for me, the issue is, well, I know that we don't have the tools to measure this yet. And so what we might say is that what we're not clear on is whether that's like completely a product of what you're cooking up in your head versus connecting to, like a larger network, sort of like, what was that movie with the blue guys, with the tree,
Avatar.
Oh, Avatar, yeah. Like an Avatar kind of thing where like there's this connectedness, or if you watch Star Trek,
figured out that we have connections, not humans, but they figured out like trees have connections. Like
but they with mycelia, right? So have you guys seen a Fantastic Fungi?
No, but I have seen the previews for it, but I've not seen it.
Yeah, so they talk about the mycelial network, and that there's this idea that like there's this interconnectedness. But the thing that I can't explain in that situation is how I saw Sleepy Eye, whom I had never met in waking life ever.
Yeah, that's the sort of thing where, it defies what we know in science. So until we prove it, it's magic. But there have been studies, and I don't know the exact dates anymore, but within the past 50 years where they measure brain waves that go beyond the skull. So it's not like your thoughts are restricted to the inside of your head. They don't understand what's happening when it's emanating out, but it's going beyond just you. So it could be something related to that. We just don't know.
Well, I'm interested to see where we're going to get with things like that. Because I mean, if you take now where they've legalized like marijuana in a lot of states, right?
Right.
And now that they've legalized it, they're starting to do a lot of research with it, and they're finding out a lot of things. What is it? Washington that legalized everything?
Oregon,
yeah. Oregon. Or decriminalized.
They decriminalized, yeah.
So I don't. There's a big difference.
There is a big difference. I don't think you're going to see a wave of that, but with other things getting decriminalized and legalized, you're going to see more research go into it, and I'm interested to see what they find with it. When we actually put a decent amount of money into research on things.
There's a fair bit of money there now, with especially with psilocybin.
That's my one that I'm interested in, psilocybin. Like, I think that if we get to a certain point, we could find out a lot of stuff about.
We're finding it. This research has been going on. So the big players in the research there are London College of Medicine, Johns Hopkins, NYU. Those are sort of the big players, and they've been doing. NYU was doing end of life anxiety work. Johns Hopkins was doing PTSD work as well.
Like hospice.
Yeah, they did this study.
Shrooms. We'll see, and have a good trip. We'll see you later.
Yeah, and with doses that were sufficient to reliably produce numinous experiences, and to a person. Everyone who underwent those therapies, were able to sort of cope with, to reframe their dying process in a way that stopped feeling afraid, stopped feeling scary.
I mean, the best way so when I took shrooms, I didn't take enough to see anything, because I think I might have taken an eighth, but
that's still 3.5 grams.
Yeah. So I still had the greatest time doing fucking nothing at all. I was in the middle of a nor'easter, and like. I mean, I've taken a couple times, but to me, it didn't matter what I was doing. I just had a great time. Life was perfect.
Yep.
I didn't have any problems.
So this is like in you know, in the macrodosing realm. You know, we talk a lot about
different.
But 3.5 is macrodosing, right? So we talk about set and setting and intention setting.
Yes,
and
that's important.
It's different when you're just going, yeah, you know, let me try some of this. Let me try some of this stuff and just hang out. Like, I mean, the first time I ever took mushrooms was like 1980. I hitchhiked around the country, and I ended up in the Pacific Northwest. It was like, yeah, I want to try shrooms. Some guy, you know, gave me a bag and said, here, have some, and they're all fresh, right? And it was, you know, I didn't take a lot. You know, I had I had an experience. And then I did a second time. We were in San Francisco and we were drinking a lot of beer, and everything was funny that day, you know, like,
yeah.
And there it went, right? Fast forward to when I started getting involved with psychedelics in 2015, because this is kind of that's when I had embarked upon my study. We'll say, I went with different intentions and took a larger dose and had a profound trauma erasing experience.
Really?
Oh yeah. And I discovered things that I didn't know were bothering me to the extent that they were.
And
There's
how a lot of people like that out there.
Yeah, you know, and like how it was like, I didn't know that this was kind of like woven into so many of my mental models about who I was as a person until I had this experience. So you'll find out that like I'm really, really open about my life and my situation. So I was a bedwetter when I was little, and I can say this now because both my mom just died, so both my parents are dead. So I can't get in trouble with that.
No one can contest.
Well, I can't hurt their feelings now. Back in the '60s when we were that was like a family shame, and the way my mom dealt with it was they sent me to school with my pee pants.
Oh, really?
That would be pretty traumatic. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, you know, like I remember like in the third grade, there was some girl I liked, and, you know, she was like, get away from me. You smell like a horse. Right. So, okay. So, you know, like all of us, you know, I survived my childhood, and I went on to do things, be confident, to be good at stuff, go to graduate school, yada, 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 yada. So I didn't know that this was kind of like percolating there in my subconscious. So this is January of 2015. I was at an apartment in the Upper West Side of New York City. I'd done a 5-gram dose, which some people call heroic dose. Like, that's a dose. Yeah. to go New York. And so I kind of like fall into this thing, and I have two experiences that happen sort of like one after the other. So the first one was that I ended up reparenting myself as an infant. My mom was 18, my dad was 20, shotgun wedding. There's like a whole story. Like, my mom was at home for unwed mothers. It's not a stretch for me to say that I wasn't exactly wanted, and that when I came, you know, that they weren't equipped to nurture a child. Yeah. And so I know, like, somehow I never knew this, but until I had this experience, but I kind of like understood in that experience the things that I didn't get. So like when I had my kids are 25 and 21, neither one of my children's feet touched the ground until they were about 2 years old. Like a tennis elbow, I always held them close, and it was really, very, very, very affectionate and physically and emotionally, lavish emotionally. So I actually reparented myself. It was like I had visions of like holding myself, and like, and then I learned that I was afraid of the dark, and it didn't, again, like it was like, nut up and, and take it, like, close the door, fuck you, too bad, it's dark, you gotta sleep, kind of thing. So I kind of like, in this act of reparenting, the trauma just kind of, it just melted away. So now we go to part two of this journey, and I asked the guy that was trip sitting for me for some water, and I start doing like this like really funky religious ceremony, and at some point I took the water and I poured it down my chest and wetted myself like from my chest and my crotch. And then I said, okay, I need new. I put on. I said, need a new t-shirt, and it like in the act of doing that, I was like, holy fuck, this is like bothered me all this time. Like it was just like in these like sneaky little places in the mental models that I created about who I was as a human being.
Yeah, mine's a crazy place.
Yeah, that I just didn't. You know, I mean, it's just how it is. Like, you know, we create an identity based on all these experiences, and we're not always conscious about all the parts that go into creating that identity. Mm-hmm. And when I got done with that, so we were like 6-7 hours into it, I'm like, holy shit! And I can truly say that trauma's gone for good.
That's cool.
Like,
there's a lot of people when I think of like that would need that. Mm-hmm. Like you always think when you're hearing shrooms and LSD and stuff like that, there's a certain type of people where you're like, you shouldn't do that because it'll be bad. Like you're gonna have a bad trip. But that's a situation where they almost need that. But you wonder like that. You sounded like you had like not a guided, but you had someone there with you, which kind of.
Yeah, I had someone there to make sure I didn't jump out the window, and like they were like, there was one point, you know, during that experience where I felt like I had to like look into a light bulb, and I was like, I got my face up on it and I'm like staring into like burning my retina, and you know the guy that was trip sitting for me goes, Bob, you might not want to do that, you know.
Just back up a little bit.
Yeah, like, you know, maybe move on to something else, right, kind of thing. And I mean, trip sitting is like another thing we should probably touch base on at some point, like
absolutely
in terms of like how to do this safely. But yeah, so but that's like one model. Then there's the ceremonial models, like when you do like I practice a kind of a form of ayahuasca drinking called Mdma. So it's a Brazilian approach to using ayahuasca in a spiritual context. So it's a syncretic religion. It has elements of Catholicism in it, elements of indigenous Brazilian, and then also African elements. Most people don't know this, but there are actually more black people in Brazil than there are in America, because that was a Portuguese colony, and the Portuguese were the slave traders. Yeah. So like they have like the African cultures like very is steeped deeply in Brazilian culture. So that's like, you know, that's like its own kind of thing. And, you know, it's kind of a formal ceremony. It's got specific movements, things that you do. And when you kind of like, when you do them in those ways, it shapes the nature of the experience that you have.
Really?
Yeah. Oh,
I mean,
very much.
About ayahuasca, but I hear it's just insane visions. Like is that the one where it's like you could be gone for like 5 days, but it's really half an hour or something like that?
Oh, that's DMT. It's
DMT.
The 5-MeO DMT. Ayahuasca's it works on the same set of neuroreceptors as LSD and mushrooms. Mm-hmm. So it's a 5-HT2 neuroreceptors. They all have DMT dimethyltryptamine in them. They all kind of function on your body and in your brain and spirit in slightly different ways. So again, like you have to kind of like think about like where you have to understand where people come from with the ayahuasca traditions. There are like two big branches. Like there's what we call, well, three if you want to count Colombian, yeah. But there's like the Shipibo, which is where you go to a maloca. So it's like this like hut in the middle of the woods with no sides in it. You lay there, and a curandero or medicine man kind of conducts the proceedings. You lay there. When you are distressed, he will come and he'll sing these songs called Icaros to you to help you with your flow of energy. So that's sort of like that's one of the ayahuasca models. The Brazilian model is a little different in that there's sort of like prayer and there's movement. So the Brazilians dance, there's singing, and there's meditation.
Okay.
So you sort of move in and out of that. So ayahuasca, like when you take a cup of ayahuasca, It lasts for about 4 hours ish, but in ayahuasca ceremonies, people drink multiple cups. And here's a really crazy thing, like, talking about like how how information gets transferred. So the ayahuasca is made out of two different things: there's a harmaline and a bark. This ayahuasca bark. Mm-hmm. If I have to remember this right, I think that it's the leaves have the DMT in them, but if you eat them without having those in combination, your body can't metabolize the DMT.
So you just pass it right through without any effects.
Right. It's just nothing.
It's like absinthe, right? Absinthe on its own won't do anything, but if you have to like cook it the right way, and then all of a sudden you're tripping. Yeah,
I don't know anything. I know like zero about absinthe. I've had it, but I don't know much about it. But somehow or another, the medicine people in the Amazon figured out, well, if you take this bark and this leaf and throw some water in it and you boil it for 3 or 4 days, this nasty tasting brown goo that gets produced is psychoactive. And so it has it's called an MAOI, so it's monooxamine something inhibitor. So you can take all the ayahuasca you want, and every time you take it, you have those psychoactive effects.
Okay.
It's really so crazy.
There's no actual, like, you don't get.
Yeah, there's no tolerance build up.
Yeah, there's no tolerance.
Right. It defeats the tolerance things. Like, and you can do ayahuasca, nightly and still have the same effects. Whereas if you take acid or psilocybin, they build up tolerance very fast. So if you're taking 100 mics of acid today, you need 200 tomorrow, 400 the day after. Yeah. By the end of the week, you could eat a dump truck full, and you're not going to trip. And the same thing
where you hear about people taking like 7, 10, 15 tabs, and they're just fine.
Yeah.
Like if you're doing it regularly, like if your tolerance is down and you take 700 micrograms or 1500 micrograms,
you're fucked.
I knew a guy. I went to a regional burn in 2018 with a guy who ate 30 tabs of acid. Wasn't a good look. It wasn't pretty. The guy was like.
He's drooling on himself. Like what's even going on?
Well, no, that was. So, do you guys know about Firefly up in Vermont?
No.
All right, no, it's a regional burn. It's a regional burn. So like at the end, it's like Burning Man. So at the end, they burn the effigy. So it's this huge thing that makes a fire that you feel 300 feet away. You feel the heat from through. This guy was trying to roll in the fire.
Of course he was.
And he would have rolled in the fire if he didn't have friends who were less fucked up than he was to hold him back. Like we actually that night we were all candy flipping. So that's when you take MDMA and LSD at the same time. It's fun. Don't do this at home. Don't do this at home, children. Do as I say, not as I do. No. It was part of my exploration. I don't do recreational stuff like that at all anymore. But this was just sort of like part of the thing. But anyway, it was great. Like he was just, and then he ended up at the emergency room, and it was like it was ugly.
That's a bad night. You don't want to end up in the emergency room when you're tripping on acid.
So
because.
Oh, go ahead.
No, good.
I was gonna say let's talk a little bit about if you're gonna do macrodosing, this whole babysitting situation. What do we want to tell people they should and shouldn't do here? Because I can't give anyone advice. I've never done it.
Right. Well, rule number 1, don't give anybody an advice because you know what happens, right?
Yeah. You told me to do this. And I messed up.
Right. That's right. I'm the one that stuffed 3 pounds of mushrooms down my belly, but it's all your fault, right?
Mm-hmm.
What you really want to do?
3 pounds of mushrooms.
Right. What you want to do is you need to find people who. Well, I'm trying to think how to parse this. So they're kind of like, we'll say that there are 3 basic models. You can do it by yourself, or let's say 4 models, right? You can do it with your friends. You could do it by yourself. You could do it with a sitter, and you can do it in a ceremonial context. Those are like your basic choices. Mm-hmm. So let's stick with psilocybin. Depending on the dose, it's not hard to do lower doses by yourself, and it's not unsafe. Like you could, well,
depending on
edit that out. Don't put in there that I just said it's not unsafe.
Yeah, we'll pull that out.
No, seriously, because that's like everything is individual dependent. But like most people can do 2.5, 3.5 grams of mushrooms by themselves and sort of like be okay. Especially after you've done it one time yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have like an understanding of what the landscape's like, and how you're going to interact with it, and you can kind of go with it. And when you do it that way, you can hold space for yourself. You can set up your intentions, and you can have a safe experience. If you're unfamiliar with non-ordinary reality states, and you have also not taken medicines like this, it's a good idea to have someone there to keep you safe.
I think in general, usually, like for me, I did it with people anyways, because if you're doing it at that dosage, you want to have people around you, usually people who are good attitude. You know what I mean? Like, so it's an experience. You want to be there with with your buddy. Don't go there with the guy who's fucking always negative and always talking about whatever to make you down. You don't want that.
Set and setting, right? So the set is mindset. So so you do that, or you can do it in a ceremonial context with other people. And this is like this goes back to like the 50s when people were going out, the anthropologists were going to Mexico and seeing what the Mexicans are doing. Like they did it in a very ceremonial context, and that like each one of those ways kind of can get you to achieve what it is that you want to achieve. But you have to be careful. And so if you're like, the thing that you tell anybody that's psychedelic naive is that don't do it unless you have somebody with you who can hold space for you.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to also be careful about who holds space for you and how they hold space for you, because you're highly impressionable in those mental states, and you interact with what's going on outside of you in different ways. So some like things outside of you can produce what people traditionally think of as bad trips, because it'll trigger thoughts and send you in places where you don't want to be. There are underground networks of trip sitters.
That's what I was going to ask.
Right. I'm not going to tell you how to get connected with them, because these are all Schedule I substances. And it's the thing is, you have to kind of like find the community, build trust, and then then things will work out. And of course, this also applies to obtaining substances. So a funny thing, so I started this in 2015. So that's 6 years ago. So I was in my 50s. My standard joke about this is that, when you're in high school and college, drug dealers. Yeah. When you get in your mid-20s, like people who know drug dealers, and then you get in your mid-30s, and if you ask for drugs, they think you're a narc.
Yeah.
Right? And so that's the situation I found myself in when I came to wanting to do the psychedelic work. And so it was like, it involves like, the first thing I did was, being a nerd, I did a whole bunch of research, and I ended up going to a wonderful conference on psychedelic research called Horizons Perspectives on Psychedelics. And it's held in New York every fall. And except for last year because of the pandemic, I have not missed a Horizons since. And I have plans to go. They're holding it in December this year. I'm with 6 other people. We're renting we're renting a big ass loft in Brooklyn to go. And it's all people who sort of like are doing the sorts of things I'm doing, like in the psychedelic space, like intentional research, like that kind of stuff. And so you go, like I had to go and build trust before I could sort of get that. And that's how I got connected to these people up and this guy up in the Upper West Side of New York. And that's how I found the community of which I am now a part.
And that's the thing. One of the things that I'm interested in, like, I know when marijuana was legalized in Mass, like if you went to one of the dispensaries in the beginning, and even still now, you see all walks of life. But one thing you were seeing a lot in the beginning was a lot of older people who couldn't get it forever in a day. We're like, well, it's legal now. Now I want to get it again. Like, and they just hadn't touched it in years. And I'm interested to see how that's going to change with more substances get out there. Like, I'm interested in when mushrooms will be legal and if it'll ever be legal.
Well, right now, I don't know if you know this, but it's actually been decriminalized in Cambridge and Somerville.
Oh, in the cities?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
So bear in mind, though, right. Well, because people get it. So, but bear in mind that decriminalized doesn't mean legal. So it just means that we're probably not going to arrest you if we catch you.
Mm-hmm.
It's not really worth the trouble anymore.
Right. Like, we're not going to go out of our way to arrest you for this. Yeah. But if you're walking around with a garbage bag full of shrooms, they might bust you for distribution. I don't know.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, even if you look at weed now, there's still, if you have so much and you don't have a license, it's still illegal. Right.
Exactly. So I don't know. I lost the thread of what we were talking about.
I was talking about when shrooms will be legal.
Oh, yeah. All right. Right. So my sense of what's going to happen with all the psychoactive substances is that they're not going to be legal in the dispensary kind of way. So like with the MDMA therapy that is on the verge of becoming legal.
Yeah, it'll be like a medical thing.
You're going to have to go to a clinic.
Yeah.
Right. That's probably the best way to go anyway. Yeah. My personal preference, and one of the reasons I haven't done anything that was psychoactive to this degree, is because I just don't trust things that I get from random people on the street. And so, especially because of my age range, there's a lot of things like fentanyl where it doesn't belong. And that's just not something I ever wanted to mess with.
Right. Well, that's the upside about mushrooms, right? Because you can't adulterate them. Yeah, they are what they are. Whereas if you're doing MDMA or you're doing acid, those can be adulterated. In fact, with LSD, there's another substance called NBOME 25 N-bombs, and it mimics the experience of LSD, but it's not LSD. And LSD is like the LD50 for LSD. So that's like it's the amount of the substance that you have to give 100 rats to kill half of them.
Yep.
Is off the charts safe. With N-bombs, it's not. You're pushing, like if you do 400 micrograms, that's micrograms, people. If you do 400 micrograms of N-bombs, like you're now in risky territory for your heart and things like that.
Well, that's a big thing out there. If you're buying it off the street, what the hell are you getting?
Well, you get testing kits.
Oh, that's a thing? I don't even know. I've been out of the game for a long time.
I didn't even know that existed. So
yeah, they're reagents. So you get you can find them, like look it up on the internet. I'm not. I don't want to. I don't want to provide that for people. But just look for MDMA testing kits, and what they will do is they'll prove that what you're taking has that in it. But it's not like when using a mass spectrometer where it's going to tell you everything that's in it. I actually used to have access to a guy that had a mass spectrometer, but he moved out to the West Coast.
Seems like a lot of work.
No, but you need to do that though with certain substances, absolutely. Like particularly like ecstasy / MDMA, right? So in the pill form, all bets are off. Like you don't know what the hell's in that stuff. If you get the crystal form. People used to say that it was harder to adulterate. You should always test your chemical substances. Mushrooms, like you're going to see a bag and it's going to have some shriveled up dried mushrooms in it, and if it doesn't look like shriveled up dried mushrooms, don't take them.
It's pretty simple, yeah.
I'm not going to taste great, like
yeah, put them in a peanut butter sandwich. Have a nice day.
That's what everyone does.
Yeah. So I've been pretty flip. I don't know. I think it's the end of my teaching week. So like Thursday night's my Friday night. In all seriousness, working with these substances requires an enormous amount of respect.
Oh, absolutely.
An enormous amount of respect because they're from one point of view, most psychedelics are safe to the body. So like if you take too much heroin, you drink too much, you take too much speed, you can really damage your body.
Mm-hmm.
from that point of view, mushrooms and LSD, even MDMA, like they're all relatively safe for your body, but you can re-traumatize yourself. Or you can.
That comes back to set and setting, right?
Right. And you can add trauma to where you're looking to get rid of it, which is why when you do it, they're kind of the parts are set and setting. You need to, if you're doing something like psilocybin, you're wanting to have someone sit with you until you become experienced enough to solo journey. If you're working with other substances, it's really important to find curanderos, healers that have worked out their own shit before they work with you. So like on one level you might say that you're like energetically vulnerable. The other is that like we could say that that our brains are just sort of like in suggestive states. Like people can fuck you over when you take it. So you don't want to just go to some yoga studio someplace and drink ayahuasca from somebody who went to Peru for a week and learn how to make the tea.
Yeah.
Right. So like the people that I work with from Brazil, there's actually, and because ayahuasca is legal in Brazil, they actually belong to an Mdma church. They're associated with it. The person that I work with assisted for 10 years before she was sanctioned to serve to other people.
Right.
And it's kind of like if you're a psychoanalyst, like you have to do your 10 years of psychoanalysis before you're qualified to in other words, you have to work out your own shit before you start holding space for other people.
There's history and education down there, whereas in my case, where I'm nervous about random shit off the street, that could have been something they learned about last week and just handed it to me. Exactly. It's not a situation you want to be in.
Nope. And even if they faithfully reproduce an ayahuasca recipe for you, and it's all like other, all otherwise like not it's not poison of any sort. If they don't know how to hold the space for you, if they don't know how to create a container that allows you to take the great emotional risks that you take when you work with that medicine in a way where you're safe emotionally, spiritually, and physically, then you really do have to be careful about stuff like that.
Yeah, and it doesn't even have to be malicious. If you just have someone who's like overly protective and anal, that can make it just as bad. Like
that's actually very true. I actually had an experience at a place north of Massachusetts, at a facility that's actually trying to become a legal ayahuasca church. And all the people that were involved, they're really nice people. Like their hearts are in the right place, but they don't have their shit together. And the ways that they were like the help that they were offering was more about you recognizing that they were giving you help than holding space for you and helping you. And it really made for energetically for like really crazy. It was like, it wasn't a particularly healthy place to do it. Like by the time I had gone there, I had a fair bit of experience. So I kind of like knew what to do to keep myself out of trouble, because they had like a big room with lots of people, and then they had a quiet room. And I just very quickly on recognized that the big room with all the people was not a good place for me.
Yeah, that's a bad idea.
So I said, I'm going to go to the quiet room. And, there, like, and then I kind of like was able to settle in. But if I hadn't had a lot of experience before I did that, that really would have turned into a very traumatic experience. In fact, I have a friend who ended up traumatizing the fuck out of herself. If you go to, she actually told the story about this on my show, or where it gave her probably about a year's worth of trauma work to do after.
Really?
It was, and again, like nobody, like no bad people, like there's no, there was no malintent anywhere.
Yeah.
But,
they just didn't react in the right ways. If you just get steered in the wrong direction, it doesn't even, like I said, it doesn't have to be that you're trying to do anything bad. It's just, if they've got the wrong mood, it could be whatever. And that's why I say, like we talked about it earlier, you have those certain number of people where you look at and you're like, that could really help you. But at the same time, you're on that verge where this could be bad for you. like where you could be doing more damage than good.
Right. You can traumatize yourself. So just like to touch on that a little bit, you brought up this idea of bad trips. So Stan Groff, who's an early LSD researcher, is very adamant about this. He comes out of the Freudian psychotherapy tradition. He's an MD psychiatrist and analyst. He kind of like his thing was that there's no such thing as a bad trip. There's uncomfortable information, and that what you want to try to do is like when you have those like very, very uncomfortable situations, and I've had a few of those too, by the way. You want to kind of like step back from it and make sense out of it.
Yeah.
And so
the problem
there's
is
another
those people in those situations. It's a good thing. Don't get me wrong, but a lot of times they're not in a point where they can't make sense of it, right? They just get overwhelmed with it.
Right. So there's this now other part that we haven't talked about with on the macrodosing end of things, which is what we call integration work. Mm-hmm. So there's, you take the medicine, you have an experience, and it's the language your subconscious speaks is highly figurative. So everything is symbolic. It's like nothing's kind of like what it appears to be. If you're a Star Trek guy like Chakotay, when he's on Voyager, he's like telling everybody, after you go put your hand on the magic box and you have the visions, you got to like be with them because they don't always mean what they seem to mean, right? Mm-hmm. So you do integration work. So now it is actually legal for licensed therapists to do psychedelic integration work.
Really?
Yes.
In all states?
Yeah, because they're not giving substance. This is after the fact. It just like it's not legal for anybody to shoot up heroin. You can go to a therapist right after you shot up heroin and say, help me, or 3 days later and say, help me, right? And the therapist doesn't get locked up for helping you make sense out of your heroin experiences.
Gotcha.
But they would get locked up if they said, come to my office and here's the needle and here's the junk and, like that, right?
I'm understanding now.
Right. So
they're really just helping you unpack everything that you ran into.
Exactly. So it's kind of like a therapy kind of thing, but there's like, there are lots of different ways to do that. So you can work with integration therapists. If you go to that maps.org website, they actually have a training program and a list of people who are qualified to help people sort of make sense out of their psychedelic experiences. But that integration works kind of like that's really where all the magic is.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say, I imagine therapists would love it. Because there's
so many
people who just won't let that stuff go. They just hold on to it forever. And it's just like a locked box, but something like that, they might let go and not even know it.
Mm-hmm. And they're like, people have lots of different experiences like that. So like in order to work with these medicines, responsibly and safely, we're making sure that we have substances that aren't going to hurt us because they're poison. We make sure that we're doing it in a place that's not going to trigger, add additional trauma. And then we set intentions. We try to be as open as possible to what comes. And then we try to make sense of it. And that integration work it's really, in my mind, I think it's really the most important piece of it. And what's been interesting is that, since the pandemic hit, the access to underground ceremonies has gotten more difficult because people can't travel.
Yeah.
And so I did like in 2018, 2019, I was drinking ayahuasca or another medicine called San Pedro, which is a mescaline-based medicine, every month. And like all these altered states and like all these things. And I'm writing and I'm doing my show about psychedelics. And I think I'm kind of like integrating all this stuff, and then pandemic hits, and so it's the last ayahuasca ceremony I went to was in September of 2018, I guess. Yeah, just before the pandemic hit. I'm still learning stuff from that one. Like in my integration work, like things are still like little bits and pieces are still like popping up and going, oh, that's what that meant. Or I forgot about that. Wow. That's what that means. And it's sort of
you
like this
record them, or you're just remembering it.
Your brain records them, man.
Well, yeah, okay. But like me, I can't remember what I did yesterday.
But that's the thing, is that these things leave memory engrams. And kind of like the way, it's really kind of the way like a lot of our subconscious material comes up. You're walking around and then some thought will pop into your head and you go, where the hell did that come from? Right.
Yeah.
What do you think, Wackus Bunkus? Kill him. you know that TikTok meme, right?
Yeah, I've seen it. Yeah.
Yeah. Andy, I saw you smirk. But this stuff just kind of like happens, and like some like little things will trigger. Like over the summer, I live in Rentham, and around the corner from me is a big apple farm. So I was out walking with my son. It was like late in the afternoon, sun was falling down, was going down. There was like a certain atmospherically, like there was all this kind of stuff. It was in June, so we came across a she turtle dropping her eggs because we live near a lot of water, and something triggered one of these memories. And I was like, whoa. And it was like I kind of like went back to that state of mind, and it sort of like it was one of those moments where a piece of an experience I'd had, like one of my very early ayahuasca experiences, in fact, it kind of like just it surfaced, like it shimmered up.
Yeah, it clicked,
and it was like came into focus, and it was like, oh yeah, that's what that was. That's what that meant. It's so yeah, so it's like those, it's those parts. So to get back to the the microdosing thing. So microdosing works a little differently. It's more like taking Prozac in a way, right? It's more, it's kind of boosting up a certain level of serotonin in your brain over time. So now what you don't do with microdosing is take it every day, and you don't do it all year long. So the standard microdosing protocol, and this was developed by a guy named James Fodderman, the LSD researcher we were talking about before, and it was initially applied to LSD, but we do like that microdosing regimen's applied to like all these substances. You figure out you do 1/10 of an active dose.
Okay.
So for mushrooms, an active dose, like an active dose that's going to like really give you an experience would be about 2.5 grams dry. So we can't like with plant materials, it's like weed, right? Like we're pretty sure we know like how much THC is in a given quantity.
But it varies.
The plant material, but it varies a little bit. So you aim for about 1/10 of a dose, and you dose every 4th day. So you take one today. So Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, you're taking another dose, and you do that for a round of 10. And then you stop. And so the theory goes, that you take the medicine on day 1, and by day 3, your body's no longer has any of the medicine in, so you can kind of like assess where you are, and then day 4 you're repeating this thing, and it changes your levels. And it's sort of like in one way to think of it is that it very slowly raises your vibrations. It's just sort of like you kind of like you end up vibrating sort of like at a different frequency. You have this like slightly different feel, kind of like the way SSRIs work. Like you don't take a 20 milligrams of Prozac today and you feel better right away, right? Like it takes about a month. It takes about a month to get to your maintenance levels. So it kind of works like that. When that happens, you become a little more sensitive to things. Elevates your mood, like lots of things change. I mostly don't microdose, but since I knew I was going to do this, I said, well, let me go full with that again. Let me do that. And I mean, to be honest, I needed it. It was like it's definitely feeling, because I had a really bad bout of sciatica over the summer, and it just which is where I met somebody's spouse. At that doctor. And it was sort of like that by the way, like totally messed up my my vision quest this year. That's another story. So I said, all right,
sciatica or the doctor?
No, the sciatica. So I go, you know, let me kind of like circle back and do this. And it's funny because I'm like, I think I'm like 5 doses in now. So I'm noticing now like this like different connectedness. Like I'm like in the mycelial network now. Like,
right,
I feel like it's supportive.
That's the one that I find interesting is that I want to see how, like a person like me, I would just take it for fun. I don't really feel that I have anything that I need to do maintenance on, but I know so many people where it's like, I want to see how because I know it can help people and I want to see them help. And I'd love to see them go through that. Cause you're saying 10 weeks or 10 doses.
Yeah. Well, 10 doses over every 4th day. So it's 40 day. It's a 40-day protocol.
I'd love to see that. I'd love to see the progression.
It's really fascinating. When I first started doing this, so I had this. I think I'm gonna go back to 2015. So I had this like, I did 5 grams. Like I'm a jump in the deep end of the pool guy, right?
Yeah.
So I get connected. I'm like, yeah, let's go, right? So I have this like big thing.
Swing for the fences.
And then I'm back to anytime I ask anybody where I can find mushrooms, I'm an ARC. So I can't get this stuff, right? So I figure out how to grow them so I get my own. But I'm also, you know, like Andy, I'm scared shitless of being in that terrain without somebody there to, you know, to watch over me. Right.
Yeah.
So like, I'm not going to do this. Like I got a family, I got a job, but like, you know, I can't be, and I'm a former public official in my town. Like I can't be tearing down my street with my clothes off going, you know, I am the ape man, right? I'm the walrus, because it's just not good. So I said, all right, so I'll microdose. And I ended up like doing 2 years of, and I think I did 6 protocols over in all told in 2 years. And that really kind of elevated things significantly for me.
Yeah.
All right. So one thing I haven't
elevated
mentioned,
what, like your tolerance for it, or
no, elevated my circumstances. So the one thing I haven't told you is why I got involved in psychedelics in the first place. So my wife was the CEO of her company. I was actually a stay-at-home dad at the time, and she told the president of the board of directors of her company no on something. So he went after her. And it caused an epic disruption in our finances and in our home life. It was bad. I mean, I almost lost my house 3 or 4 times. I found myself in 2014. This was like, we had all this shit. My wife got cancer, and then I had to have 3 stents put in. We didn't have health insurance. I thought I was going to die. Like I was like AFU, all fucked up, right? And I literally in the fall of 2014, I was in my garage with a rope around my neck,
really,
on a ladder. And I mentioned that I rock climb, so I know how to tie knots. So if I kicked the ladder out from under me, that would have been it. So I didn't do it in the moment because I realized that my children would come home and find me. But it was also this huge wake up call, because it was like, what am I doing? Like, what the fuck, right? Like, I have to do something. So, you know, I tried all the medicines the doctors could give me. I even went to a partial inpatient program for severe depression. You know, when I started talking about Psilocybin, they wanted to involuntarily commit me because they thought it was drug seeking. I'm bringing all this research going, what about this? What about this? Like, this doctor says this study says that, you know. So, and then I had like bullshit, right? So I get connected. I have this experience, and so I have this like big movement with with releasing some very old trauma, but not the trauma that's right in front of me.
Yeah.
So I'm like, how do I deal with this? Like, how do I function? And not to be a better not to be a better capitalist, but how do I like make it so that I can?
How do I deal with life?
Well, like, how do I deal with life? So that I'll make dinner for my kids, and exactly. want to get off the couch, I'll get off the couch and that kind of thing. So the microdosing sort of like gradually over the course of 2 years, like raised my vibrations. And it was never like, I've never looked back.
Now, did you find when you did your 40-day protocol, I'm not sure what the gap was between your next protocol for another 40 days, but did you find that you were dropping back down before you got to the next protocol, or you stayed at a new baseline? It
was like level, the baseline changed over time.
That's the beauty with mushrooms and the things that they're finding in the studies is it's like they're at a certain doses, they're finding that it's like rewiring the brain.
Literally.
And it's to a point where I'm going to butcher the shit out of it. We talked about it in our episode, but it was like, it's rewiring the brain and it's basically pushing off all the bad into where you come out of it with a completely different mindset. And it's not like a different mindset where you're just going to sit around and do nothing and be lazy all day. But yeah, it's some fascinating stuff.
Yeah, so actually, it's funny. It's triggered a memory of mine. So the Imperial College of London did these fMRI studies back in like 2014-ish, I think. Robin Carhart Harris is like the principal investigator in that. So they took these pictures. You remember those old commercials? Like they showed the frying pan and they go, "This is your brain." And they crack open the egg and they go, "And this is your brain on drugs," right? So. This reverse happens. So they show a picture of, they show a picture of a person's an fMRI of a picture. So it's a functional MRI. So it's they watch you do things and then take MRI pictures. So they show this picture of the fMRI with this is your brain without mushrooms.
Yeah.
And there's very few neuroconnections lit. And then they go, and this is your brain on this is your brain on psilocybin, and it's Technicolor and it's like
blown up.
Stuff. It's like totally blown up. So what they discovered was that you created new neuroconnections, and that they did follow-up studies. At that time, I think they went out maybe 19 months or 20 months or something like that. Those same connections persisted over time.
Yeah. And Grizz, it was a couple of years ago when we did the psychedelic episode, Psychedelic Renaissance. I'm sorry, 1 year ago.
Year ago.
Then,
that's when I got all my research.
Yeah, and there was the same study from the Imperial College where they found that when they'd use these test subjects and they introduced them to the psilocybin, it created new pathways in their brain. It basically disabled some of the old ones and created many more new ones to replace it. But they didn't go away. It didn't really revert back to where it was before the baseline.
Exactly. The way it was explained to me, and this is sort of like from having gone to these research conferences and talking to some people. The way it has been explained to me is that when you create a memory, you're setting up a neural connection, and every time you retrieve the memory, it sort of like strengthens that particular neural connection. And so when we end up with ruminative thoughts and recurring things, like those particular neural connections become so strengthened that that's just where it goes. That's where your thoughts go. When you introduce something like psilocybin to the picture, it actually pulls the memory out, diverts the part of it from the prefrontal cortex, which is the assigning value to what it is. And this is like the one of the really interesting things about these substances. They seem to naturally create a self compassionate state. So you take this stuff, you pull the memory up, and when you refile the memory, you've decoupled the negative association, the dark stuff, and then it goes back in. And what I've always found very interesting, because again, like I live in science and spirit, this idea of like what's real when these things happen. I will say that like in the psychedelic experiences that I've had anyway, feel real.
Yeah.
In default universe consensus reality, in the default universe consensus reality sense of the word, it feels real. So it's been lifted up out of your subconscious, stored away. And so now you're going back to those memories, you're strengthening those connections. And
Right.
those and the negative stuff, like it's kind of like, you know, somebody went in, if you want to use a computer thing, like someone went in and scrubbed they
defragged.
they defragged the hard disk,
Yeah.
took the bad bits out of the file, like
I don't
whatever.
even know
like,
how many people are going to know what that means. But
yeah, but you know what I mean. So like it did that, and that's like part of the mechanism for helping with the trauma is that you kind of like you alter the memory. You alter part of the memory, like the you know the trauma part of the memory. You don't. It's not like it didn't happen, but you experience it internally a little differently.
through different eyes, almost.
Yep.
It just popped in my head with today with the way VR is going, and what we were talking the other day with VR and games and stuff like that. Is there going to be a point where people start using that mixed with things like mushrooms or LSD or whatever for that guided trip?
I think people are doing that now.
Oh, I guarantee they're doing it, but is it meant to be that way, or they're just doing it for a good time? You know what I mean?
No, I think people are I think people are people are studying all kinds of stuff now, because it used to be you couldn't get the substances. Period. You know, when you do a legal study, you have to get your medicine from the DEA.
Yeah, one of the things people don't realize, which we've mentioned a couple times, is a lot of this stuff was not something that people could access to actually do these studies because they were Schedule 1, which disqualifies them from scientific research. Right, because the Schedule 1, for folks who don't know, Schedule 1 says that there's no medicinal value whatsoever.
Which
that it's just
almost everything on Schedule 1 is complete bullshit. Yeah, it's literally almost everything on there it's actually medicinal. Well, even I mean, not advocating it, but even heroin like arguably had or has a medicinal value, right? It just depends how you use it, right? Yeah. So that that kind of like there's the FDA sort of like more open to not FDA, the DEA sort of more open to this. It's in the air. People are doing it. There's all these decriminalization movements going on, so it's easier to do studies. And you can go to your boss at a university and say, yeah, I want to do psychedelic studies, and you're not going to get laughed out. Like I just where 20, 30 years ago you would have. Yeah, I don't want to mention names, but I just started teaching at a new college this fall, and I told the people that I was hiring, I said, I do the show Ouroboros Story Hour. I do psychedelics and psychoactive plant medicines. You need to know now so that if so that you don't hear from somebody else and then want to run me out in the rail. I'm giving a talk at the school in November where it's the name of the talk. I write poetry, so I'm putting together a poetry collection called Whiskey, Cool Jazz, and Ayahuasca, and I'm giving a talk about the role that substances play in creativity, and how my ayahuasca, how my psychoactive plant medicine work has activated my creativity. Like I've written in the last year or so, like 150 poems. Like this has been this like most productive time of my life. And like, it's very much about. Well, yeah. And again, I'm not condoning heroin myself either, but if you look at a lot of great rock artists, all of them were on heroin. Oh yeah. Jazz guys do something. Yeah. Right. So, but my point though is that I could go to at a new job, not like, oh yeah, I have tenure and yeah, just in case you hear from anybody, I'm doing I didn't have to do it. It was like, I'm out here. This is what I'm doing. We call that being out of the psychedelic closet. Yeah. But we're in an interesting time for a lot of things. And that's one of them where it's being more accepted. And that's why, to me, I would hope that I don't think a lot of the others were going to get there, but I would hope maybe shrooms, we might get there to where that might be. Oh, no, that's happening. But I don't know if it's going to happen. No, it's going to get legalized. I not only think it, I know it. There's like venture capitalists are lining up in droves. Well, look at how much they made off of weed. Well, that's right.
I don't want to mention the names of the big players in this because it's very controversial. Because like a lot of us are sort of like, the underground OG cool guys. Like we're looking at it going, oh man, this really sucks. It's going mainstream now, right? and they're going to turn.
It's great because of that too.
Well, except that like a lot of people view it as that someone's going to commercialize a sacrament.
And
it
they
would be
will
like
too.
No, that's right. Like it's like, oh yeah, we got the secret formula for for the host, and now we're going to sell it to everybody and make bazillions of dollars out of it. Because in the ceremonial and religious context, psychedelics are sacraments,
right?
And so we're kind of like, a lot of us are looking at that going, like, this is this doesn't align with why we do this.
Right.
But I still think in that situation, like, let's say they do, you're still going to have those people who take it to that level because that's what they're looking for, if there are people like you out there, they're going to be more willing to bring in people like, yeah, it's there, but try this. It's something completely different. I mean, look at weed and what they're doing with weed now, and they're trying all sorts of different new things. I think
I know
the corporations are out there, they're making the money on it, but people, the users and the people treat it differently.
Right.
Like
exactly.
I think you're also getting a lot of people who are like Jerry, who are just worried where on the street it might have something else where now it's not. So now they're willing to have it and branch out in other ways.
To be sure. I mean, there's just there will be benefits to it, but it's kind of like, I mentioned that more because you're like, well, I'm not sure if it's ever gonna. Trust me, it's gonna. Like they're like, there's VC capital out there, and I'm not mentioning names of companies on purpose, but there's like there's a great deal of VC capital going into companies that are looking to exploit the financial potential of legal psilocybin.
And Andy, I know that you have a terrible memory, but late last year, I actually sent you an article about that where I don't remember the names, so I can't even mention them anyway. But
I know, and
it's mostly in Europe where the big investments are happening. People in the States and in European countries are investing in these European companies that they have a little more freedom than we do here in the United States to do that kind of research. And
again,
they're really starting to invest in it.
I love reading that stuff, but I'm a skeptic, so I always sit there and I go, I'll believe it when I see it. Like,
it sounds like you need to microdose.
When you heard weed was when you heard weed was coming around the corner and legalizing and stuff, you're like, yeah, all right, I'll believe it when I see it. Right?
And now here it is.
I mean, I've been hearing that since I was in high school, and that was a long time ago.
Yeah. As with everything in capitalist cultures, follow the money. There's a lot of money going into it. So,
oh my God,
and the thing is that that there's what we are discovering is that the psych meds that are being prescribed now, they don't really work. I mean,
no.
It's a multi-bazillion-dollar industry. People are taking whatever their doctors tell them, and everybody's still miserable.
That's the thing. If you know anyone who's ever taken any stuff like that, you either mask the hell out of it. It changes the person completely or turns them into a zombie. And none of that is the answer, right? These people really, they need to deal with it. They may not want to, but they need to deal with it and confront it. And none of that stuff actually does it. And actually, what it's funny is, I think of it kind of with the antibiotic. You know how they used to just give antibiotics for everything?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you got
same thing with every other medicine. Well, now you're seeing people coming around on the other side with mental health and being like, I don't want medicine. I want how do I work on this? How do I deal with this? You know?
Right. So there's the thing you see, like the mindfulness stuff, meditation, yoga, like, and again, like it's many doors to the same room. Right.
Yes.
So not, and one of the things I talk a lot about when I do my show is that these, like, they kind of, you'll hear a lot of stories that will make it seem like these are magic wands and silver bullets, but they're really not. There's this thing in the meditation world in Buddhism where, like, we say, like, 10 years is the magic number. Have a serious meditation practice for 10 years, and you'll change your life. Right? And so everything that you can do from meditation, from psychedelics, you can do meditating over 10 years. So the difference is that when you do psychedelics, you get all the information right away. But then it takes you 10 years to figure out what it all means and to integrate it into your life and to apply it in ways that are constructive. So you're spending, it's just like, that's how you spending your 10 years.
Yeah. No,
that's a good warning. Yeah. I think actually, Grizz, that's probably like the perfect place to end that on a positive note. And before we finally wrap it up, Bob, do you want us to have people go anywhere specific to find out more from you, or I could just stick with the websites that you suggested?
Yeah. So, well, there's that. And then I produce a show called Ouroboros Story Hour, which is I'll tell you my memories. This is, you can tell them at the end of my week. So my tag, it's Ouroboros Story Hour, True Tales of Healing in Altered States. And so what I do, I used to do this in live spaces, and now I do it in Zoom, and it's become international. So I bring on 4 speakers every month, and they share their experiences with medicine. So like upcoming this month, I have a couple of friends from Ecuador that are going to be speaking. I've had people from like literally all over the world. So my point of view on this is the relationship between stories and how we construct our realities. So these are sort of like all about sharing highly personal stories that move people's meters in some way. And then how does that affect things? And everyone's mileage varies and all that sort of stuff. So
yeah,
you can find that stuff. Most of my content right now is on Facebook at Ouroboros Story Hour, all one word. I'm in the process of transitioning to YouTube. So the YouTube is just Ouroboros YouTube/Ouroboros Story Hour. There you will find, there you'll find a trove of stories from people who had experiences with lots of different medicines, lots of different modalities, and to get a measure of like on the personal level. Because like my original goal was to sort of like fill the space between popular press and the research, because the research is kind of like, the popular press is what it is. Research can be incomprehensible, and then they're sort of like putting human beings to the data points.
Yeah.
And so that, that's kind of like where, that's where we do it. That's where that is. And so there people will learn a lot about lots of different personal experiences. So cool. Maps.org is a good place to look. Arrowwood, I think it's arrowwood.org. Let me, and I'll drop I'll drop this link in the excuse me, in the chat as well. So those few that I kind of threw there in the chat, like Maps, Arrowwood, those are good ones.
Cool, man.
Well, we appreciate you coming on the show today and kind of starting the path for our listeners to bridge that gap between science and what they could be doing. Because like you said, the science is a lot to unpack if you don't know anything about it.
Well, yeah, and it's like, I read a lot of science, but I'm an English professor, so it can get incomprehensible, and it takes a lot of work. But just to leave the parting thing for people is respect this stuff for what it is. Understand that you can re-traumatize yourself. You can help yourself tremendously, but you can re-traumatize yourself. So be mindful of who you're involved with, where you're getting your substances, the context in which you do them. And if you do all that stuff, it can be kind of safe. And I'll sort of like, this is kind of like the last story I'll tell you about this. Vis-a-vis my sciatica, I recently had to get an injection in my spine for corticosteroids. And so that's a mood changing, that's a mood changing substance. So this is kind of like happening while I'm microdosing. And there was this war going on inside my head, inside my body and inside my head. And on some levels I couldn't figure out like what was what. And so the hard thing about where we are with psychedelics right now is that we're conducting experiments on ourselves with no real clear way to discern the difference between correlation and causation.
Yeah, totally.
there's like, I mean, I do scientific method to some extent, but nobody studied this stuff. If I go to the guy that gave me that shot and I say, hey, what do you know about the interaction between corticosteroids and psilocybin, he's going to go, oh, it's not going to want to talk about that because right. So be really careful about that stuff. And just because your buddy did it and got good results doesn't mean you're going to do it. And don't necessarily trust. Like, be skeptical, I guess.
Yeah, no, those are good words. I like that.
So thank you very much for having me on. I was, in case you haven't figured out, I love to talk and I love to talk about this stuff. So
yeah, we do the same, man. It was great. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks.
Sure thing.
It's been great.
Sure thing. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Well, Jaron, I enjoyed that one. I had a lot of fun with it. I hope you guys enjoyed it too. That was an interesting conversation. A little bit of a longer one.
I think this is right up the listener's alley. And you guys can comment on the video and let us know what you think. But this seems like the sort of thing that you guys really tend to be drawn to, you fucking drug addicts. But I actually think it was a very solid episode with a lot of information that a lot of people are really going to like, because it's still, it's been studied for the last 15 years or so on a broader scale, but it's still not really talked about that much, especially in mainstream.
No, I think it's coming up, and I think in the next 5-10 years, you're going to hear a lot about it, especially psilocybin. Like, I don't see MDMA coming to anything other than, and even that going to medicinal, I think we're a way out just because it's a harder drug.
Yeah, well, change is slow, but I think you're right on psilocybin, because just look at the studies. That's all you have to do. Look at the science behind it. If it's used medicinally in a proper setting, it's obviously not a magic bullet, but it's significantly better than the shitty antidepressants that people are on. You're not going to hear a commercial for a psychedelic psychotherapy treatment saying one of the side effects is suicide, because that makes a lot of sense, right? If you're going to take a pill, you should take one that has a side effect of not solving the problem you're trying to treat.
I also like that when Bob was talking about the side effects of drugs, he went from dead dick to cottonmouth. Like, they're right next to each other.
Well, neither one is very good for some good times, especially if you mix them.
Thank you again for listening to Beautiful Bastards. New episodes every Monday. Remember to like and subscribe. I can hear my hair growing.
Oh my God. See you guys on the next one. We'll end it there.